The rain had been falling since morning, not the kind that pours and stops, but the slow, steady kind that soaks everything it touches. By late afternoon, the sidewalks of the city were slick with water, puddles forming in every dip and crack. People hurried past with umbrellas tilted low, eyes fixed on their phones or the next dry doorway. No one looked up. No one looked around, except for her. She stood near the corner of 5th and Elm, just under a street lamp that flickered like it couldn't decide whether to stay on or give up. Her coat was thin, damp at the shoulders and too small across the back. In one hand, she held a worn canvas bag with a strap that kept slipping off her shoulder. In the other, she held a small hand, her daughter's. The girl couldn't have been more than 5. She wore mismatched socks, one red, one gray, and boots that were a size too big, stuffed with newspaper to keep them from sliding off. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with the kind of quiet watchfulness children develop when they've learned the world doesn't always make sense. They hadn't eaten since yesterday. Not really. There'd been half a banana in the morning, shared between them, and a few crackers saved from a free lunch program that had shut down the week before. The woman had tried everything, calling shelters, standing in lines, filling out forms that asked for addresses she no longer had. But the system moved slowly and hunger doesn't wait. She'd walked for hours that day, from one neighborhood to another, hoping someone might offer work, cleaning, folding, watching a pet, anything for a few dollars. But no one needed help. Or if they did, they didn't trust a stranger with tired eyes and wet shoes. Now, as dusk settled and the streetlights blinked on one by one, she knew she had to do something, anything. She knelt down in front of her daughter, brushing a wet strand of hair from the girl's forehead. "Wait right here, okay?" Just for a little while. The girl nodded, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. The woman took a deep breath. She wasn't a performer. She'd never sung in public before. But when she was a child, her own mother used to sing to her. A soft, old lullaby passed down through generations, full of warmth and quiet hope. It was the only thing she could think of that might bring comfort, not just to her daughter, but maybe, just maybe, to someone passing by. She stepped into the dim circle of light beneath the street lamp, cleared her throat and began to sing. Her voice wasn't perfect. It cracked a little at first, shaky from cold and nerves. But as the notes rose into the damp air, something changed. The melody was simple, gentle, like a hand reaching out in the dark. She sang about stars watching over little ones, about storms that pass, about bread on the table and a warm bed waiting. A man walking his dog slowed down. He didn't stop, but he turned his head. A teenager on a bike pedaled past, then circled back, hovering at the edge of the sidewalk. An elderly woman in a long coat paused, her grocery bag resting on the wet pavement. She listened for nearly a full minute before dropping 2 crumpled bills into the open canvas bag at the singer's feet. Most people kept walking. The city didn't stop for one woman's song, but a few did, and that was enough for now. The woman sang for nearly 20 minutes. Her throat grew dry. Her legs ached from standing still in wet shoes. But she didn't stop. Every time she felt like giving up, she glanced over at her daughter, who stood exactly where she'd been told, eyes fixed on her mother like she was the only thing in the world worth seeing. That look kept her going. Finally, when her voice began to fade and the street grew quieter, she stopped. She walked back to her daughter, picked up the bag and peeked inside. A few coins, a $5 bill, a folded note that read, "God bless you." It wasn't much, but it was enough for a loaf of bread, maybe some milk, maybe even a small container of fruit. She squeezed her daughter's hand. "Let's go get something to eat." The girl smiled, a small, tired smile, but real. As they walked away from the street lamp, a man sitting on a nearby bus bench quietly pulled out his phone. He'd been watching the whole time. He wasn't young, maybe in his 70s, with silver hair and hands that moved slowly. He opened his camera, found the short video he'd recorded without thinking, and stared at it for a long moment. He didn't know the woman's name. He didn't know her story, but he'd seen the way she held herself, not begging, not crying, just singing with everything she had to give her child one more night of safety. He typed a few words. "This mother sings for her child's dinner. Please help if you can." Then he posted it to a local online group, a place where neighbors shared lost pets, garage sale notices, and complaints about noisy construction. He didn't expect much. Maybe a few likes. Maybe someone would recognize her and offer help. He tucked his phone away, stood up, and walked toward the bus stop, unaware that in less than an hour, thousands of people would see that video. That strangers would stay up late arguing about what to do. That someone would start a fundraiser before midnight. That a teacher would message her principal, "We need to find this family." But none of that mattered right now. Right now, the woman and her daughter were walking into a small corner store, the bell above the door jingling softly. The woman counted out her coins carefully, choosing the cheapest loaf of bread, a small carton of milk, and a single banana, yellow and slightly bruised but still good. The cashier, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Lena, didn't say anything. She just rang up the items quickly and slipped an extra apple into the bag when the mother wasn't looking. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The air smelled clean, like wet pavement and distant trees. The mother held the bag close to her chest as they walked, her daughter skipping slightly beside her, the stuffed rabbit now tucked under her arm. They didn't have a home to go back to, not yet. But for tonight they had food. They had each other. And for the first time in weeks, the woman felt something flicker inside her. Not hope exactly, but the quiet beginning of it. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight she had done enough. And somewhere behind them, unnoticed, a single car slowed as it passed the flickering street lamp. The driver glanced at the empty spot where the singer had stood, then drove on, carrying with them a memory they couldn't explain, but wouldn't forget. The video didn't go viral right away. At first it just sat there, another post in a busy online group, buried under complaints about potholes and photos of lost cats. But then, a high school student saw it while scrolling before bed. She showed it to her mom. Her mom shared it with her book club. One of the women in the book club worked at a local radio station and mentioned it during her morning show. By lunchtime, the clip had been reposted on 3 different community pages, then picked up by a regional news blog. People couldn't stop watching it. There was something about the way the woman sang, not for attention, not for praise, but with her whole heart, like she was wrapping her daughter in sound. And the little girl standing so still, so trusting, like she knew her mother would never let anything truly bad happen. Strangers cried in their kitchens. Delivery drivers paused their routes to watch it again. Teachers showed it to their classes, not as a lesson, but because they needed to believe kindness still mattered. Within hours, someone created a fundraiser. "Help this mother and child get back on their feet," the page read. No fancy words, no dramatic music, just the video, a short description, and a goal. $2,000 for food, clothes, and a safe place to stay for a few weeks. Donations started trickling in. Then pouring, a retired nurse gave $50. A teenager donated his lawn mowing money, $37.25, carefully counted and entered with a note, "Hope you get warm socks." A local bakery pledged to match every dollar up to $500. By midnight, they'd raised over $8,000, but the woman didn't know any of this. She and her daughter were asleep on thin mats in the back room of a church basement, offered by a kind volunteer who'd heard about them through a friend of a friend. The room smelled like old books and floor cleaner. It wasn't home, but it was dry. It was quiet. And for the first time in weeks, the woman slept without one ear tuned to every sound outside the door. The next morning, her phone buzzed. It was an old device cracked at the corner, barely holding a charge. She'd kept it turned off to save battery, only using it in emergencies. Now it lit up with message after message. Texts from numbers she didn't recognize. Voicemails piling up. Notifications from an email address she rarely checked. Confused, she opened her email. Dozens of messages. Most were from strangers. "We saw your video. How can we help? Is this you? Please respond. We've started a fundraiser in your name." Her stomach dropped. Video? What video? She scrolled back through her memory. The street lamp, the singing, the rain. Had someone filmed her? She felt a flush of shame, then fear. Was this going to bring trouble? Would someone report her for begging? Would child services get involved? She'd heard stories, good intentions twisted into investigations. She almost deleted everything. But then she saw a message from a woman who identified herself as a social worker with the city's family support team. "We're not here to take anything from you," the message read. We're here to offer help. Housing, food assistance, childcare while you look for work. No judgment. Just support. The woman read it 3 times. Then she called the number. Over the next 2 days, things moved faster than she thought possible. A caseworker met her at a coffee shop. No uniforms, no paperwork shoved in her face, just a calm voice and a listening ear. They talked for an hour. The woman shared her story. The job loss, the landlord who raised the rent without warning, the nights spent in a parked car before finding the church shelter. She didn't cry. She just spoke plainly, like someone who'd run out of energy for drama. The caseworker nodded. "You've done everything right," she said. "You kept your child safe. That's what matters." By the end of the week, they'd secured a temporary apartment through an emergency housing program. 2 rooms, a small kitchen, clean sheets on the bed. It wasn't forever, but it was a start. A local grocery store donated a week's worth of groceries. A seamstress from a nearby town mailed 2 handmade coats. One for her daughter, in soft wool with real buttons. Still, the attention made her uneasy. Reporters called. A TV station asked for an interview. She said no to all of it. "I didn't do anything special," she told the caseworker. "I just sang." But to the city, it felt like something more. What moved people wasn't just her voice, it was her dignity. She hadn't held out a cup. She hadn't shouted or cried on the sidewalk. She'd offered beauty in the middle of hardship, and that quiet courage struck a chord in a world that often feels too loud, too harsh, too indifferent. Even so, she didn't stop singing. Every evening around sunset, she walked back to that same corner, not to ask for anything, but because it felt like the right thing to do. She'd stand under the flickering street lamp and sing the same lullaby, or sometimes a new one. Something about kindness, about neighbors, about light returning after dark. People started gathering. Not crowds, but small groups, 10, 15 at a time. They'd listen quietly, some with tears in their eyes, others just standing with their hands in their pockets, remembering what it felt like to care. One night, a young man left a guitar at her feet. "My grandpa played this," he said. "He'd want you to have it." She didn't know how to play, but she thanked him and carried it home like a promise. Another evening, a group of high school students came with handmade signs. "Thank you for reminding us to look up." They didn't ask for photos. They just stood and listened. She began to understand. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about what her song had awakened in others. A memory of compassion, a nudge to act, a reminder that behind every face on the street is a story worth hearing. Still, she kept her focus on her daughter. She enrolled her in a nearby preschool program that offered free meals and after-school care. She signed up for job training, customer service, basic computer skills, resume writing. She washed dishes at a diner 3 nights a week, saving every extra dollar. She mended clothes instead of buying new ones. She wrote thank you notes by hand to everyone who'd helped, even if it was just a few lines on lined paper. One afternoon, while sorting through donated clothes, her daughter held up a bright yellow sweater with tiny stars stitched along the sleeves. "Can I wear this tomorrow?" she asked. "Of course," the woman said, smoothing the fabric. "It feels like sunshine," the girl said, hugging it to her chest. That night, as they sat on their small couch eating soup from mismatched bowls, the woman looked at her daughter's face, clean, fed, calm, and felt a quiet swell in her chest. Not pride exactly, more like relief. Like maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. Outside, the city buzzed as usual. Cars honking, sirens in the distance, the hum of life rushing forward. But inside their little apartment, there was peace. And on the wall leaning against the bookshelf was the old guitar waiting. She didn't know it yet, but soon that guitar would carry her voice even farther. And the city, still watching, still listening, would be ready to hear it. The knock came on a Tuesday morning just after breakfast. The woman was washing dishes at the small sink in their temporary apartment, her daughter coloring at the table with a set of donated crayons. She dried her hands on a towel and opened the door to find 2 people standing there, one in a neat suit, the other holding a folder with the city's logo on it. Her stomach tightened. She'd learned long ago that official-looking visitors rarely brought good news, but the woman in the suit smiled gently. "Hi," she said. "I'm with the mayor's office. We'd like to talk with you just for a few minutes. No pressure. We can sit right here if you'd like." The woman hesitated, then nodded. She pulled out 2 chairs from the tiny kitchen table and offered the visitors tea. They accepted, and as steam curled from the mugs, the city representative explained why they were there. "We've been following your story," she said carefully. "Not just the video, but everything you've done since. How you've worked quietly. How you've cared for your child. How you've thanked people even when you had so little yourself. The mayor would like to meet you." The woman blinked. "Why?" "Because your voice, literally and figuratively, has reminded this city of something important," the woman said. "And he wants to listen." She didn't want to go. The idea of walking into City Hall surrounded by cameras and officials made her skin crawl. She wasn't a speaker. She wasn't an activist. She was just someone who'd sung to feed her child. But then her daughter looked up from her drawing, a picture of the 2 of them under a big yellow sun, and said, "Will there be cookies there?" That decided it. 2 days later, she stood outside the tall stone building downtown, gripping her daughter's hand. Reporters were already gathered, but when they saw her, they didn't shove microphones in her face. They stepped back. Someone had told them, "She's not here for a show. She's here to talk." Inside, the mayor met her in a quiet conference room, not the grand chamber with the flags and the podium, just a table, 4 chairs, and a plate of store-bought cookies. Chocolate chip, her daughter's favorite. The mayor didn't start with praise. He didn't call her a hero. Instead, he asked, "What do you need?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't need much for myself, but there are so many others like me. Mothers, fathers, kids who fall through the cracks because help takes too long, or costs too much, or asks for papers they don't have. I got lucky. Others don't." She told him about the nights in the car, the shame of asking for food, the fear that someone would think she wasn't trying hard enough. She talked about the families she'd met in the shelter, people working 2 jobs and still choosing between rent and medicine. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She just spoke the truth plain and steady. The mayor listened. Really listened. He took notes. He asked questions. And when she finished, he leaned forward and said, "You're right. We can do better." A week later, he held a press conference, but he didn't stand alone. He invited her to sit beside him, not as a prop, but as a witness. He announced a new emergency support program, faster housing placement for families with children, expanded meal services at community centers, and a pilot project to connect job training with childcare, so parents wouldn't have to choose between work and watching their kids. "We were reminded," he said, glancing at her, "that dignity isn't a luxury. It's a necessity." Afterward, reporters wanted to interview her. She agreed, but only if they also talked to the people running the shelters, the volunteers handing out meals, the teachers who notice when a child hasn't eaten. "This isn't just my story," she told them. "It's everyone's. Back home, life didn't change overnight. She still woke early to get her daughter ready for preschool. She still scrubbed dishes at the diner. But something had shifted, not in her circumstances, but in how the city saw her. Strangers nodded when they passed her on the street. Store clerks slipped extra fruit into her bag. A librarian saved books for her daughter each week. More importantly, she started getting calls. Not from news stations, but from other parents. "I saw what you said," one woman whispered over the phone. "I've been too ashamed to ask for help. Can you tell me where to start?" The woman gave her the number of the caseworker, the name of the food pantry, the hours of the free legal aid clinic. She didn't offer solutions, just a hand to hold in the dark. One evening, as she walked home from her shift, she passed a new sign posted outside the community center. "Emergency Family Support. Walk-ins welcome." Below it, in smaller print, "Inspired by voices that refuse to be ignored." She stopped and touched the paper with her fingertips. It wasn't about her. It never had been. But maybe her song had opened a door someone else could walk through. That night, she sat on the edge of her daughter's bed, humming the old lullaby. The girl was already half asleep, one arm wrapped around her stuffed rabbit, the other clutching the yellow sweater like a shield. "Mama," she murmured. "Yes, sweetheart." "Did we help the city?" The woman smiled in the dim light. "Maybe a little, but the city helped us too." Her daughter yawned. "Good. I like it when people help." "Me too," the woman whispered. The next morning, she received a letter from the school district. They were starting a new music program for young children in underserved neighborhoods. and they wanted to know if she'd be willing to lead a weekly singing circle. No experience required, just a kind voice and a willing heart. She said yes, and so every Thursday afternoon, she stood in a bright classroom filled with tiny chairs and crayon drawings on the walls, leading a group of wide-eyed kids in simple songs about rainbows, kindness, and coming home. Some of the children came from homes like hers, uncertain, stretched thin, full of love but short on everything else. When they sang together, their voices rose like birds taking flight, and for a little while the weight of the world felt lighter. She didn't know it yet, but those Thursday afternoons would become the foundation of something bigger. A place where music wasn't just sound, it was shelter, where a lullaby could be a lifeline, and where a city, once shocked into silence by a mother's song, was slowly learning to sing back. It started with a text message, just 3 words. Be at the window. The woman had just finished washing the breakfast dishes. Her daughter was brushing her teeth in the tiny bathroom, humming a tune from preschool. Outside, the morning sun was soft, the kind that makes everything look hopeful. She almost didn't check her phone. She'd learned to ignore most messages, especially from unknown numbers. But something about those 3 words made her pause. She walked to the living room and pulled back the thin curtain. At first, she thought she was seeing things. The street below, usually quiet on a Saturday morning, was filling up with cars. Not just a few, dozens, maybe more. They rolled in slowly, one after another, parking neatly along both sides of the road. No horns blaring, no engines revving, just the soft purr of idling motors and the occasional door closing gently. Then she saw the signs, taped to windshields, held up on dashboards, tied to side mirrors with ribbons. We see you. Sophia deserves joy. Thank you for your song. You're not alone. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned and called softly, "Come look." Her daughter patted over in her pajamas, toothbrush still in hand. When she saw the cars, her eyes went wide. Are they for us? I think so, the woman whispered. Downstairs, people were getting out of their vehicles, not rushing, not shouting, just standing beside their cars, looking up at the apartment window. Some waved. Others simply stood with their hands folded, faces calm and kind. A few held small bags or boxes. One man carried a potted sunflower, its yellow face turned toward the light. No one approached the building. No one demanded anything, they just showed up. A neighbor from across the hall poked her head out.
What in the world is going on?
She asked, squinting down at the street. I don't know, the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. But I think they came to say thank you. Word spread fast. Within an hour, the block was lined with over 80 cars. People came from all over the city, some from neighborhoods she'd never heard of. A retired firefighter brought a handmade quilt. A teenage girl left a stack of children's books with a note, for Sophia's library. A couple who ran a small bakery dropped off a basket of fresh bread and pastries, still warm. The local news arrived, but they kept their distance, filming from the sidewalk without pushing in. Even the police showed up, not to clear the street but to help direct traffic and make sure everything stayed peaceful. One officer, a woman with silver streaks in her hair, looked up at the window and gave a small, respectful nod. Inside the apartment, the woman didn't know what to do. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not like this. So quiet, so deliberate, so full of care. She wanted to run downstairs, thank everyone, hug them all. But she also felt overwhelmed, like her heart might burst if she tried to hold it all at once. So she did the only thing that felt right. She walked to the corner of the living room where the old guitar leaned against the wall. She hadn't played it much, just a few chords here and there, learning slowly from online videos after her daughter went to bed. But today she picked it up, tuned it as best she could, and stepped onto the small balcony. The moment she appeared, a hush fell over the street. She didn't speak. She just began to play. It wasn't a perfect performance. Her fingers fumbled a little on the strings, but she sang the same lullaby she'd sung that rainy night under the street lamp, the one about stars watching over little ones, about storms that pass, about bread on the table and a warm bed waiting. This time, though she wasn't singing out of desperation, she was singing out of gratitude, and then something unexpected happened. From the street below, someone joined in. Just a few words at first, soft, unsure. Then another voice. Then another. Soon, dozens of people were singing along, their voices rising together in imperfect harmony. Some knew the words. Most didn't, but they hummed the tune. They swayed gently. They held up their signs like banners of hope. Her daughter stood beside her on the balcony, clutching the sunflower someone had left. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she was smiling. The song ended. Silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It was full of something warm and unspoken. Then, one by one, people got back into their cars. They didn't honk. They didn't linger. They simply drove away, leaving behind the gifts, the signs, and a street that felt different, like it had been washed clean not by rain, but by kindness. Later that day, as she sorted through the donations, a winter coat, coloring books, jars of homemade jam, a note that read, "My daughter is safe because of people like you," she found a small envelope with no name. Inside was a key and a slip of paper. Apartment 3B, Maple Street. Yours for 6 months. No questions asked. She didn't know who it was from, and she didn't need to. That evening, she and her daughter walked down to the corner store, the same one where she'd bought bread with coins months before. The cashier, Lena, took one look at them and smiled. "Heard about your parade," she said, ringing up a carton of milk and a box of crackers. "City's been talking about nothing else. Was it too much?" The woman asked quietly. Lena shook her head. No, it was exactly enough. On the walk home, her daughter skipped ahead, the sunflower held high like a torch. "Mama," she said, "do you think they'll come back?" "I don't know," the woman replied. "But I think what they gave us today wasn't just for us. It was for everyone who's ever felt invisible." She looked up at the sky, now streaked with pink and orange. The street lamp they used to stand under was dark in the daylight. But she could still see it, still remember the cold, the fear, the first note she'd sung into the rain. Now, the same street felt like sacred ground. Because sometimes change doesn't come with speeches or laws. Sometimes it comes with 80 cars, a sunflower, and a city that finally learns to listen, not just with its ears, but with its heart. A year had passed since that rainy night under the flickering street lamp. The seasons had turned. Summer heat, autumn leaves, winter snow, and now spring again, with cherry blossoms dusting the sidewalks like pink confetti. The woman stood backstage at the city park's open-air amphitheater, adjusting the strap of her guitar. Her hands weren't shaking this time. Not because she wasn't nervous, but because she'd learned that nerves and courage can live in the same body. Tonight wasn't about survival. It was about thanks. The city had called it the Night of Gratitude, a simple evening of music, stories, and shared meals to honor everyday kindness. No politicians on tall podiums, no flashy lights, just string lights hung between trees, folding chairs on the grass, and a small wooden stage where neighbors would take turns sharing songs, poems, or just a few quiet words about what community meant to them. Her daughter sat in the front row, wearing the yellow sweater with the star-stitched sleeves, now slightly too small but still her favorite. She waved eagerly when she saw her mother peek out from behind the curtain of potted ferns. Backstage, a retired teacher helped her tune the guitar. "You ready?" she asked softly. The woman nodded. "I think so." She wasn't the headliner. She wasn't even supposed to be on the program at first. But when the organizers asked the community who they wanted to hear from, hundreds of voices said the same thing. Her, the one who sang in the rain. She walked onto the stage alone. The crowd, maybe 500 people, fell silent. Not the heavy silence of judgment, but the gentle hush of people leaning in, hearts open. She didn't speak right away. She just looked out at the faces, the same faces that had once hurried past her on the street, now sitting together under the same sky. She saw the elderly man who'd filmed her that first night, now holding his granddaughter's hand. She saw the cashier from the corner store, the caseworker, the high school students who'd made signs, the firefighter with the quilt, the baker, the librarian, the quiet neighbors who'd left groceries on her doorstep without a word, and parked along the street beyond the park gates, dozens of cars. Just like that Saturday morning, their headlights off, their presence steady and sure. She took a breath and began to play. Not the lullaby this time. Something new. A song she'd written slowly, night after night while her daughter slept. It was about cold sidewalks and warm hands, about strangers becoming neighbors, about how a single note sung with honesty can echo farther than you ever imagined. Her voice wasn't louder than before, but it was steadier, clearer, like it finally belonged to her. Halfway through the song, something beautiful happened. From the audience, a child's voice joined in, soft at first, then stronger, then another, then adults. Soon the whole crowd was singing along, not because they knew the words, but because the melody felt familiar, like it had always lived inside them, waiting for the right moment to rise. When the last chord faded, there was no roaring applause, just a long, quiet moment, then a slow wave of clapping, warm and deep like rain after a drought. After the show, people didn't swarm her. They waited. One by one they came up, not for photos, not for speeches, but to say simple things. Thank you. You helped me ask for help too. My daughter sings your lullaby now. She accepted each word like a gift. Later, as she packed up her guitar, her daughter ran over, holding a paper plate with 2 slices of cake. They saved the biggest piece for you, she said proudly. They sat on a bench near the edge of the park, eating cake under the stars. The city hummed around them, distant traffic, laughter from a nearby food truck, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was ordinary, and that was the miracle. Life wasn't perfect. She still worked hard, now teaching music part-time at the community center, helping kids find their voices the way she'd found hers. They still lived modestly, but they had stability, safety, and something even more precious: belonging. A few weeks after the concert, she received a letter from the city's housing authority. Her temporary apartment lease was ending, but because of the success of the new family support program, inspired in part by her story, they were offering her a spot in a long-term affordable housing complex with a waiting list that used to stretch for years. She cried when she read it, not from sadness, but from the quiet joy of knowing they could finally stop holding their breath. Her daughter started first grade that fall. On the first day, she wore a new backpack and carried a lunchbox filled with real fruit, not newspaper-stuffed boots. The teacher later told the woman, she told the whole class her mom sings to the stars. At home, the old guitar sat on a stand in the living room, no longer leaning against a wall like an afterthought. Sometimes on quiet evenings, the woman would strum a few chords while her daughter danced barefoot on the rug, spinning until she collapsed in a giggling heap. She never became famous. She never wanted to, but in her own quiet way she became a thread in the fabric of the city, a reminder that dignity doesn't come from having everything, but from giving what you can even when you have almost nothing, and the city remembered. Not with monuments or headlines, but in small lasting ways. The corner where she once sang now had a small bench with a plaque that read, "For those who sing when no one's listening and those who learn to hear." The community center named its music room after the voice that brought us together, local. Schools included her story and lessons about empathy and courage, not as a fairy tale, but as proof that ordinary people can spark extraordinary change. One evening, months later, she walked past that old street lamp. It had been fixed, no more flickering. She paused for a moment, then smiled. She didn't need to sing there anymore. Her song had already traveled further than she ever dreamed. She kept walking hand in hand with her daughter toward home. And somewhere behind them, unnoticed but present, a car slowed as it passed the bench. The driver glanced at the plaque, then drove on, carrying with them once again the quiet truth that kindness once planted never really stops growing. There was no grand plan, no big announcement. It began with a single folding chair placed on a quiet sidewalk one Saturday morning, just outside the community center. Next to it sat a small wooden stool, a guitar case open on the ground, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Songs for anyone who needs to be heard." The woman hadn't told anyone she was doing it. She just showed up. After everything, the street lamp, the video, the cars, the concert, she'd kept waiting for life to return to normal. But the truth was, she didn't want it to. Not the old normal anyway. The one where people walked past each other without seeing, where pain was hidden behind closed doors, where singing in public felt like begging. She wanted something softer, something shared, so she started small. Every Saturday at 10, rain or shine, she'd sit on that sidewalk with her guitar and invite anyone to stop by, not to listen to her, but to share their own story, their own song, or just sit in silence if that's what they needed. At first no one came. She played to empty air, birds, and passing dogs, but she kept coming back. Then one week an older man paused mid-stride. He didn't say much, just stood there for a few minutes, hands in his pockets, eyes distant. When she finished her song, he cleared his throat and said, "My wife used to hum that tune while she cooked." He didn't stay long. But the next Saturday, he brought a thermos of tea and sat on the folding chair for 20 minutes, saying nothing, just breathing in the music like it was medicine. Word spread, not online, not through news, but the old-fashioned way. Neighbor to neighbor, cashier to customer, bus driver to passenger. There's a woman on Oak Street who listens. She doesn't fix your problems, but she makes you feel less alone. Bring your own song, or just your silence. Soon others began to join her, not as an audience but as participants. A teenager with a notebook full of poems read one aloud, voice shaking but clear. A young father brought his toddler and sang a clumsy lullaby he'd made up the night his baby wouldn't sleep. A woman who hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks sat on the edge of the curb and cried quietly, while the woman played a slow, gentle melody. No one recorded it. No one posted it. This wasn't for views or likes. It was for healing. The city noticed, not with cameras or headlines, but with quiet support. The community center started leaving out extra chairs. A local cafe began donating cups of hot cocoa in winter and lemonade in summer. A retired music teacher brought spare instruments, ukuleles, tambourines, a harmonica, and left them in a basket labeled "for borrowing." It became a ritual, not a performance, a gathering. One spring morning, a woman arrived with tired eyes and a baby strapped to her chest. She didn't speak at first, just stood at the edge of the circle swaying slightly. When the song ended, she whispered, "I haven't eaten today." Without a word, someone from the small crowd handed her a sandwich from their bag. Another offered a bottle of water. The woman with the guitar didn't offer advice or pity. She just nodded and said, "You're safe here." That afternoon, the new mother stayed, and the next Saturday she came back with a song of her own. This was how it grew. Not with fanfare, but with presence. The woman never called it a movement. She didn't start a nonprofit or launch a website. She just kept showing up, week after week, offering space for people to be human. Messy, broken, hopeful, whole. Her daughter often came too, sitting cross-legged on a blanket with coloring books. Sometimes she'd get up and dance. Sometimes she'd hand out crayons to other kids who wandered over. She called it Mama's listening time. At home, their life had settled into a rhythm that felt steady, not spectacular. They still lived in the same modest apartment, though now the walls were covered in drawings, concert tickets, and thank you notes from strangers. The woman worked 3 days a week teaching music to children and spent the rest of her time gardening in the community plot behind the center, where she grew tomatoes, basil, and sunflowers, always sunflowers. One day, a city planner stopped by during listening time. He didn't sit. He just listened from the sidewalk. A week later, he returned with a proposal. Turn the empty lot next to the community center into a permanent listening garden, benches, shade trees, a small stage, and a wall where people could leave notes, songs, or drawings. The woman agreed, but only if the community designed it together. Over the next few months, neighbors came with ideas. Kids painted tiles for the walkway. Retired carpenters built benches from reclaimed wood. A local artist helped create a mosaic wall shaped like an open ear, made from broken pieces of pottery, mirrors, and sea glass, each shard donated by someone who'd once felt broken too. On the day they opened the garden, the woman didn't give a speech. She just sat on one of the new benches, strummed her guitar, and sang the lullaby, the one that started it all. People came from all over the city, not in cars this time, but on foot, on bikes, in wheelchairs, holding hands, pushing strollers. They didn't gather to watch her. They gathered to be together. Years later, long after the news cycles had moved on and the internet had forgotten the viral video, the listening garden remained. It became a place where grief was honored, joy was celebrated, and silence was respected. School groups visited to learn about empathy. Newly arrived families found friends there. Elderly neighbors met for morning tea and old folk songs. And every Saturday at 10, if the weather allowed, you could still find the woman there, older now, hair streaked with gray, fingers calloused from years of playing, but her voice steady and warm, still rising like a promise. She never thought her song would change the city. She only meant to feed her child, but in trying to keep one small light alive, She helped the whole city remember how to shine, and that, more than anything, was the real miracle, not the cars, not the cameras, not the crowds, but the quiet, daily choice to show up, to listen, and to believe that even the softest voice can echo in the hearts of others, long after the music ends.